Final thought segment here, like we do every show. Wrap things up with a little segment we call Final Thoughts, which is just our final thoughts on not only the show, but just anything in general. It can be sports related, non-sports related. We've done a couple non-sports related ones that we were pretty excited about. This week, I decided to do a sports related one. I brought the idea to you, something that I've had conversations with people about, and I enjoy it. I think it's fascinating to look back and talk about players in college sports that were great, that were superstars, but that just didn't pan out and didn't do well at all in the pros. And there's a fair amount of them. There are a few. I have three here, Zach. I don't know how many you picked out, but I have three to go over. We'll kind of bounce back and forth like we always do. I'll do one, you do one, and vice versa there. So the first one that I'm going to start with is a guy that I had a lot of fun watching in college. Played college basketball at BYU and just took over the season at BYU a handful of years ago, and that's Jimmer Fredette. I mean, what this kid did at BYU was fantastic. And I'm going to throw this out there. I don't like talking about race, but in a black-dominated sport that is basketball, for this little white kid to do what he did that year, it's fantastic. You don't see it very often. He averaged 29 points per game, Zach, as a senior at BYU. He was a consensus All-American, won the Wooden and the Naismith Award for best basketball player in the country. He was a first-round pick then of the Milwaukee Bucks, 10th overall, so he's a top 10 pick. And it was all downhill after that. I mean, and real quick, getting back to what he did in college, like, I remember that run that he made taking BYU to, I believe, the Sweet 16, I think, was as far as they got him. I mean, you talk about, like, people, like, joke around and say, like, what's this guy's range? Oh, this guy's in range as soon as he walks to the gym. That was Jimmer Fredette. I mean, I remember games where he would dribble down the court, and he would pull up from 6 feet behind the three-point line and just bury him. And it's just like you're watching these kids, and you're like, no, oh my, like, you know what I mean? Like, as a coach, that's what coaches are thinking. They're like, no, Jimmer, no, oh my gosh, wow, yes, keep doing it. You know what I mean? That's the kind of player Jimmer Fredette was, and he was fearless. And another thing I liked about him, he kind of had a swagger to him, talked some shit a little bit, didn't let people get under his skin, knew he was good, and showed it on the court. Getting back then to his NBA days that weren't anything special at all. In his career, I found this kind of hard to believe. In his career, he only started 7 games. In 9 years, he only started 7 games in the NBA. His NBA 9-year average, 6-1-1. That's, I mean, and you kind of saw it, and it's funny. I see it with these players, and I often wonder, like, seeing a player like Jimmer Fredette, like, you almost knew his game wasn't going to translate to the NBA. I mean, you should see that. I don't think he should have been a top 10 pick. You want to take a reach on him in the second round or something? All right. But, I mean, I wouldn't have made him a top 10 pick, but that's neither here or there. As for what he's doing now, real quick, Zach, he's actually killing it in China. He actually
is.
Last week, he actually scored 50 points in the game, which I believe was the second time he's done that this year. I can't remember, but he's killing it in China right now. So, I mean, he's still getting his money. He's still doing what he loves, is play basketball. So he's playing overseas in China right now and doing pretty well. But as far as professionals, NBA, it just didn't pan out for Jimmer Fredette after having a great career at BYU.
He was actually a guy I had on my list as well.
Oh, damn.
And he kind of changed the culture at one point where it was a thing for there to be Jimmer range. And it was like a normal thing to go and play basketball, and kids would just be out there 7 steps behind the three-point line. Jimmer! And it was just, it was a very normal thing. Like, oh, Jimmer range! It was
so true.
Constant. And he created that trend. And he goes in the category of a couple other guys that they were drafted right around that top 10 range that were incredible shooters, and they all kind of took career paths that were different. But I put J.J. Redick, Steph Curry and Jimmer in that same category, that they were incredible shooters in college, incredible basketball players, so much fun to watch. They all of them took their teams farther than expected in the tournament. And all three went in different directions. Jimmer was the one that had the least success there. He, as you mentioned, he was officially drafted by the Bucks, but he was immediately traded to the Kings. He started his career there.
Yep.
He had a great opportunity early on with some bad Kings teams. His first year, he was able to get just over 18 minutes per game, only put up 7.6 points per game with that time. And he was a guy that really didn't do much outside of scoring. So when he wasn't able to do that, he wasn't a very productive player. And he spent his first 2 years there with Sacramento. His minutes per game went down every single one of his 5 years in the NBA. So his first two were with Sacramento. The next 3 years he spent with three different teams before, like you mentioned, he did go over and start to play in China. Jimmer was more disappointing out of those three, whereas JJ Redick was still right around the top 10 that he was picked. He was a great shooter in college and didn't quite live up to expectations, but became a very good role player. And then you've got Steph Curry, that another similar player like that, incredible shooter in college, and he became a superstar in the NBA. So I think that's what teams were taking a chance on there with Jimmer when they drafted him that high, that he could be someone like a Steph Curry. But it's tough to tell when it comes to those guys that rely on shooting if they're going to have that skill set to be able to enable them to score in the NBA, even when they have that crazy Jimmer range or Steph Curry range or Redick range, however it is for that specific player. I actually had two other basketball players that were my first two guys I wanted to get into. And I combined them both together because they were similar type players that were a lot of fun to watch in college. First one came from Duke. Shane Battier was an incredible college player. Lockdown defender there for Duke. And a fantastic scorer, averaged 19.9 points his final year there, his senior year at Duke, before he went out to the draft and was picked number 6 overall. And he became, kind of like I was saying with JJ Redick, a role player. He was a great defensive player. He was a good three-point shooter in the NBA, but not nearly what you'd expect from a number 6 overall pick after having a great college career. And the other one was still, to this day, my all-time favorite player to watch in college basketball because of the incredible things he could do. This is the next guy I'm getting to, not Battier. But Corey Brewer was incredible Florida. On those Florida Gator teams. He was just such an amazing athlete, another lockdown defender, but just the constant times he would do every single year. We see it from LeBron where he chases someone down, blocks him off the backboard. That was a regular thing when it came to Corey Brewer. He was just such a great athlete, picking pockets when it came to taking away steals. He just was an all-around player, just so much fun to watch there. And he didn't quite pan out there in the NBA. A guy who's been around the NBA for a long time. He's been playing since 2007, so he's made it a full decade there, but just never the high-quality player people expected him to be, especially when he was drafted number 7 overall by Minnesota, where they were having some rough years. He had a chance to play a lot for them. He played over 20 minutes a game the first 2 years and then over 30 minutes a game his third year, which was his highest scoring average. He did put up 13 points a game. Similar to Battier, kind of became a defensive stopper in the NBA and a role player. He improved his shot to kind of hang around in the NBA there, but he was so much fun to watch and just didn't quite pan out to what was expected when he got to that NBA level. So those were two guys that really stood out to me when it comes to basketball. I'll send it back to you for your next one that was great in college and then disappointed after that.
Yeah, it's funny. Those Florida teams were fun to watch, coached by Billy Donovan with, Brewer, and obviously people think of Joakim Noah there was kind of the heart and soul of that
Al
team.
Horford.
And Horford was there. That team was stacked. I mean, there's a reason they won 2 national championships. That those teams were just stacked. Really fun to watch there was Florida. I'll keep it on the basketball side. This guy, college basketball. The next one is going to be college football, my last one. This one, same year, came out as J.J. Redick. Adam Morrison from Gonzaga. Everyone remembers Adam Morrison. He was the butt of a lot of jokes. It started in the NCAA tournament where Gonzaga got upset by UCLA, where he's crying on the court. He's standing with his head buried into his knees and just sobbing after they lose a heartbreaker to UCLA, and then him riding the bench in LA, and his long hair and his crust stash, and he just kind of has always been the butt of every joke. But one thing that wasn't a joke was the way he played basketball at college at Gonzaga, and his junior year, which was his last year there, he came out after that. He was the nation's leading scorer, scored 28 points per game. Was a first-team All-American, was the co-USBWA Player of the Year, which he shared with, ironically enough, J.J. Redick, and was just – I remember watching him play, and it's funny, too, because I always laugh anytime I see players that play with the undershirt. You remember he would always wear the undershirt. He would always wear an undershirt. He never just straight rocked the cutoffs. He always rocked the undershirt underneath his jersey, and just – just one of them players that if you would have saw him at your local park, he probably would have been the second to last pick if you're picking teams. Because he just doesn't look like a basketball player. Like, you see him and you say, that guy don't. He plays in the NBA. No, you wouldn't say that Adam Morrison's a basketball player, but he did it very well. And I did it for a good bit there at Gonzaga, but it just didn't translate into the NBA. He was picked 3rd overall in the 2006 draft by the Charlotte Bobcats. He played in 161 games, started 28 of those in 4 seasons in the NBA. He averaged 7 points per game, 2 rebounds per game, and 1 assist per game, and shot 37% for his career. So just didn't live up to the expectations that a 3rd overall pick should in a draft, and just never did anything, and just really faded away there. And I will always remember watching him at Gonzaga and just watching him in amazement and kind of the stuff that he did and scoring so effortlessly. So Adam Morrison is my second one. Do you have another one there, Zach, before I give my last one?
I do. I also had Morrison as one of mine, that he was an incredible scorer there in college. He actually did have a solid rookie year there with the Bobcats, where he put up 11.8 points per game. He played 78 games, almost 30 minutes per game. And then it was unfortunate for him, but he was injured the entire next season. Yep. And then from that point, that's when he went to the Lakers. He actually won 2 NBA championships with the Lakers.
Yep.
Sitting on their bench, getting 13 minutes a game the first year, and then 7 minutes a game the second year. But he was able to come up with that. And a lot of people point that out. And I fully agree with it when they talk about how meaningful championships are to someone's legacy, where Adam Morrison, a huge disappointment when it comes to his draft status and what he accomplished in the NBA, but did win two championships, where you compare to someone else like a Karl Malone, like a Russell Westbrook, that are superstar players but have never won a championship. And that's one of the biggest reasons why I always hate that argument of just basing off what someone accomplished when it comes to championships on their legacy and how great they were. But he's one I definitely had. Although I do have kind of a group of what I would call the Detroit Lions wide receivers of the early 2000s.
Let me name them. Let me see if I can name them. How many do you have? Three?
Three of them. Back-to-back years.
It was back-to-back. So Mike Williams from USC.
Yes, sir.
Carlos Rogers from Michigan State.
Charles Rogers.
Carlos Rogers was a cornerback out of Auburn. Sorry. The third one is that's I can't.
You're gonna remember it as soon as I tell you.
Do you know what college you went to?
I do. He went to Texas.
Oh, Roy Williams.
Yep.
Yep, Roy Williams. That's right. Boy, that's a good one, man. That is a good one. Those three, what a bunch of losers. And they just didn't they didn't learn. Matt Miller was just like, all right, we'll take another receiver. Oh, he didn't work out? All right, we'll take another one. Oh, he still didn't work out? All right, we'll take another one. That's great, man.
It was just a disaster of the early 2000s there. And the biggest one is the one I'm going to start with, which is Charles Rogers, who put up absurd stats at Michigan State. He had 1,470 yards and 14 touchdowns as a sophomore. He had 1,351 yards and 13 touchdowns as a junior. When he got picked, he was the number 2 overall pick. He was taken ahead of Andre Johnson, who's likely going to be a Hall of Famer. And what a disaster in the NFL. He played a total in his entire career 15 games.
Less than a season. Wow.
Less than a season. And that's across 3 different years before he was cut and never heard again. He had all kinds of issues when it came to drugs, being arrested. He had a DUI. He had all kinds of problems with that and just never worked out at all. And as you mentioned, they came right back at it. Well, that didn't work. Let's try another one. And they took Roy Williams the exact next year after that, who did not work for them as well. Like we said, out of Texas, he actually, out of these 3 receivers, had the best career. One time, he had a good season. He had a 1,300-yard, 7-touchdown season.
Yeah.
Dropped back after that. And then I remember this vividly, but the Cowboys went out, gave up some high draft picks. I believe it was 2 first-round picks they traded for him. And he was just a huge disappointment. He still put up some decent stats. He had a 7-touchdown season, but for what they gave up, monster disappointment there. And then the third was big Mike Williams. He was taken 10th overall in the 2005 draft and just like Charles Rogers, never really produced much of anything. He did play more games than Rogers, but his best season with the Lions, who drafted him, was 350 yards and 1 touchdown. He went on to eventually in 2010, 5 years after being drafted, and after spending 2 years completely out of the NFL, he did have a 750-yard season with the Seattle Seahawks, but just 3 back-to-back-to-back years, the Lions taking receivers that completely bombed, and all of them were top 10 picks, which is just incredible.
That's just bad luck. I mean, I remember all 3 of those players in college, and all 3 of those players in college were just absolute studs. I mean, Charles Rogers was – I mean, you threw out those numbers. I mean, it was unfair. Like, he was a monster. And then Roy Williams at Texas, I mean, he was long, he was big, he was that physical presence that just, always won those 50-50 balls. Wasn't a burner by any means, but he was like Calvin Johnson almost, which is funny because he played in Detroit as well. Was just big and could out jump you and always use his size more than his speed. And then Mike Williams, I mean, he was on the USC teams that had won something like 28 straight games or something like that, and was a freak as well. Started as a freshman and really came into his own there with Matt Leinart as quarterback for USC. And but that's why the Lions were the Lions for so long there, Zach. I mean, that's so idiotic. I mean, you draft a wide receiver 3 years in a row, you have bigger issues than wide receiver. Like, who was their quarterbacks those years? Mike McMahon, John Kitna.
I remember Dan Orlovsky because he ran out of the back of the end zone.
Yeah, against the Vikings. Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, that's when Matt Milne was their GM, and he was just awful. So I'm not surprised. That was during their 0-16 season. So I'm not surprised. That's a good one though. The trio of Lions receivers. That's really good. My last one, dude, is someone recent. Johnny Manziel. I mean, what he did at Texas A&M was crazy. I mean, just he was like a video game. I mean, very similar to Russell Wilson, not as polished as a quarterback, as passer as Russell Wilson, but just with his escapability and making plays on the run and just playing backyard football, essentially. I mean, he carried Texas A&M. I mean, he went into Alabama when Alabama's still good and still one of the best teams in the country, but went into Alabama and single-handedly defeated the Crimson Tide. I mean, and just picked them apart when their defense was averaging, like, giving up 9 points per game. I mean, Manziel went in there and just tore them apart and lit them up. And, won the Heisman Trophy there at Texas A&M and was a first-round pick then of the Cleveland Browns. Started 8 games in 2 years. Didn't really amount to anything. Through 7 touchdowns, 7 interceptions in those 8 games. Or in his career, I should say, and it's not just in his starts, but in his cleanup roles as well. And then it's kind of a Manziel. I never thought it's funny. I remember having a conversation with one of our close friends, Chaz, who asked me when he was coming out. He said, "Do you think Manziel is going to do well in the NFL?" He thought he would. I said no. I was adamant about it. I said no. His style it will not translate to the NFL. It just won't. I guarantee it. And it didn't. And the fact that he was a first round pick was comical. And but at the end of the day, it's kind of a sad story with Manziel. Got addicted to alcohol and battled substance abuse there for a while, had to go into rehab, had kind of a falling out with his parents. His dad was putting out statements saying he was afraid his son was going to die. That's tough to read, man. I mean, someone that has it all and just would rather party and, go out every night and get fucked up versus putting in the hard work and training a little longer to try to make something out of your NFL career. And he's been out of the league for a handful of years now, and just a fall from grace from a Heisman Trophy winner to, with a lot of talent that, just didn't pan out in the NFL. And I just think it was more the fact that the way he played and his size at the quarterback position, it just wouldn't have worked out for Johnny.
Well, I've got one more here, and he actually comes from the exact same draft as Jimmer Fredette, who you brought up at the beginning. This draft was fascinating to me because I remember it very vividly because it was the first year I had ever joined a fantasy basketball dynasty league. And I had one of the top picks. I ended up with the number 3 pick in what was said to be a 2-person draft. There were 2 definite all-stars.
I know who you're talking about.
Yep. There are 2 guys that stood way ahead of everybody else.
Yep.
And I did everything I could to move up from that number 3, could not get to number 2 or number 1 in that league. And it ended up Kyrie Irving went number 1. And these 2 guys actually played together last year for the Cleveland Cavaliers. They signed the number 2 pick, Derek Williams, just a monster in college at Arizona. His sophomore year, he averaged 19.5 points per game, as well as 8.5 rebounds per game. He was just such a fun player to watch throughout his years there in college, and then just did not put it together in the NBA. He came out, was drafted by Minnesota Timberwolves, had 2 all right seasons there, and then has just bounced around the league ever since. He's not currently playing on a team, but he played for Sacramento, New York, and Cleveland after that. So he did get a chance to try and win a championship last year, kind of like an Adam Morrison, but he just did not live up to that number 2 overall pick. And the other crazy thing about it is when you look through, that was a good draft. there were some high-end players, and I'm even going to skip over some of the quality kind of role players and solid players that he was picked ahead of him that are clearly better. But Kemba Walker, an all-star, he was drafted after him, the pick before Jimmer Fredette. And then from that point on, all these picks were also chosen after Jimmer. The next pick after Jimmer, Klay Thompson. Then Kawhi Leonard went 15 after both of those guys that we talked about being busts. Yep. We had Jimmy Butler was taken, another all-star. He was taken at the very end of that first round, as well as a lot of starters here. We got Reggie Jackson, Kenneth Faried, Alec Burks. They've all been solid. That there's a lot of guys that could have been chosen, and Tristan Thompson, Enes Kanter, guys around the league that are still very solid, that went behind Derek Williams. He did not come close to living up to expectations.
It's funny. I actually was wrong. I thought you were going in a different direction there. I thought you were talking about a different draft class. I thought you were talking about, I forget what year it was, but the year that KD came out, when it was
Greg Oden.
It was either him or Greg Oden. I thought you were going to talk about Greg Oden, who went ahead of KD with the number 1 pick by the Trailblazers, and then the Sonics got KD at 2. And Oden. And it wasn't Oden's fault because of injuries.
Right.
That's the reason he didn't play. It's not because he was a bust, because he was terrible. But it was just injuries. But I thought that's the direction you were going to go. If it's funny, Greg Oden, I always use the example. I've never seen a 18-year-old look like a 50-year-old like I've seen Greg Oden. Greg Oden was 18 years old, and he could have walked into a retirement community and filed and probably got approval to live there. It was crazy how older he looked. But I digress. And, yeah, I thought that's the direction you're going to go to. But, yeah, Derek Williams is a good one as well. And it's just crazy how so many of these players can be so dominant at the collegiate level. But that goes to show you just how much better and how difficult it is to take that next step and play professional sports, just because everyone is the best player in the world that's playing in that league or that association. So good stuff tonight, man. I thought that was a good topic there for the final thought. There was some good conversation, and it's always fun to kind of look back at some of these players that you remember and kind of reminisce a little bit about them.
Yeah, I fully agree. Definitely fun. And there's a lot of guys we didn't even cover. We didn't worry about some of the cliches that really stand out, like a Jamarcus Russell, like
Ryan Leaf,
Sam Bowie, that was taken ahead of Michael Jordan. There's a lot of other people like that were expected to be great, and it just didn't work out. And then there's other guys that didn't work out because of other reasons, that they were thought to be really good or have a lot of potential. Like we saw a lot of the high schoolers that were drafted before they changed that rule with
Kwame Brown, yeah.
1 overall. Sebastian Telfair looked incredible in high school. DeJuan Wagner was another one. Or one of my favorites that I came across today, that I believe it was the number 11 pick for the Orlando Magic. They took Fran Vasquez, who has never played a game in the NBA. Never came over. I forget where. I want to say he was from Greece, maybe. But I don't remember where he was. He was a foreign player that just refused to come over. And it was just a wasted lottery pick there for him. That whatever it was, number 11, number 10, never even came over. So it was some fun things to come across there. And, of course, Tim Tebow. He was a first-round pick.
He was. But, hey, he won a playoff game.
That is true. That's a lot more success than quite a lot of these guys had. So
that's right.
For that, but he just was not fun to watch. Not a very talented player. An incredible physical human being, and incredible
good athlete, just not a very good thrower. I mean,
not a good quarterback there
at all. But all right, man. Hey. Good stuff, dude. Like I said, fun getting back at it with you after our little off week last week. Good to get back on track here again. I look forward to do it again next week. Everyone out there, if you're listening, keep listening, keep sharing, keep kind of spreading the word as we try to build this up to as big as we can. And look, we have fun doing it week in and week out. So appreciate you. I've had people hit me up, randomly saying, "Hey man, listen to the podcast. Really like what you're doing. You guys work well together. Keep it up. I'm going to keep listening." So anytime I hear that, it makes me feel good. So good stuff tonight, man. And I look forward to doing with you next week. I'll let you close.
Yep, we'll be right back next week. So everyone, have a great week. Enjoy your football coming up here.